Welcome to Cause Before Symptom, uncovering the real cabal and spiritual forces that are controlling the world. And now, here is your host, James Carner.
Welcome to Cause Before Symptom. I'm your host, James Carner. Today is February 13th, 2026. Tonight's episode is all about part 25. This time, our examination of the book of Daniel between the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox canon and the King James Bible. So Daniel unfolds within exile under successive empires like Babylonian, Median, and Persian. And unlike earlier prophetic books that speak primarily to Jerusalem before or during its fall, Daniel speaks from within foreign courts, inside. The setting here is imperial. The tension is allegiance. The question beneath every chapter is consistent. Who truly rules? Well, the book divides naturally into two movements. The first half presents court narratives of faithfulness under pressure, refusal of defilement, interpretation of royal dreams, survival in furnace and lion's den, and the humbling of proud kings. The second half shifts to apocalyptic vision, beasts rising from the sea, heavenly thrones established, the Son of Man receiving dominion, and prophetic timelines unfolding toward final conflict and resurrection. Well, the theological center of Daniel is divine sovereignty over earthly empire. Kings decree, boast, and threaten. Yet the Most High rules in the kingdom of men. In the kingdom of men. Judgment humbles arrogance here. Faithfulness is preserved under persecution. The kingdom cut without hands outlasts gold, silver, bronze, and iron. So translation must preserve this hierarchy of authority without exaggerating apocalyptic symbolism or softening the severity of imperial pride. Daniel's visions intensify progressively. The statue of chapter 2 gives way to beasts in chapter 7. The Ancient of Days presides. One like the Son of Man receives everlasting dominion. And the 70 weeks prophecy introduces covenant chronology and eschatological tension. The book closes with resurrection language and sealed understanding reserved for the wise. And the Ethiopian Tewahedo witness and the King James rendering, they both share Daniel's structural and theological foundation. Differences will emerge in phrasing, particularly in visionary and time-oriented passages. Tone will shape emotional resonance, whether visions feel ominous or ordered, symbolic or literalized. The guiding question remains constant. Does translation alter theology, or does it shape cadence? Well, Daniel reveals exile without surrender, empire without permanence, prophecy without panic, and its conclusion affirms resurrection hope and the final vindication of the faithful. The Most High rules, and his kingdom stands. Looking forward to tonight's show. It's going to be a good one. The book of Daniel is huge. Shout out to everybody on the live chat Rumble. Number one warrior is Scorpion 7823. Scorpion says, "Hey y'all, hope all is well. Hyper for another show." Well, thank you, buddy. I'm hyper too. Number two warrior is Boots Hafner. Boots stating, "Here we go. We go. One. Something's wrong. Me, hello, Pastor James, voice of the Rumble airwaves and creator of ElitePotion.com. Hello, Warrior family. Hoping everyone is doing great. Let's all hit that thumbs up button." I think what Boots was trying to say is, where we go one, we go all. Well, that's what Lucifer said to the 1/3 of the angels. That's the Q sign and slogan, which turned out to be Tavistock Institute, paid for by DARPA to keep the right out of rising up and using their guns to take over a criminal organization. And that criminal organization is, simply put, Washington, D.C. Whatever comes out of that place is not good, period. And let's all do me a favor. I need you all to please like the show. Hit the X button, hit thumbs up, and then live chat. You won't lose your spot, I promise. But it really helps with the algorithm and helps spread this message if you think it's important, which I do. Therefore, that's why I also hit the thumbs up button. All right, guys, let's get into breaking news.
Welcome to Shitty Breaking News with your host, James Carner, offering his shitty opinion.
So the FBI describes Nancy Guthrie. I put it, Nancy, put them together. Nancy Guthrie case suspect as a backpack as sheriff asked locals for video footage. Oh my God. I'm going to tell you, our FBI looks like a bunch of morons right now. They have full authority to spy on us, and they've got all kinds of predictive capabilities with AI. And the FBI, NSA, CIA, all the alphabet soup agencies who claim, oh, we're for the people, for this lie to keep going on that they can't even figure out who these people are. It's sad. And remember, they could use this as a case for a police state, which we're already in, but to make the current American system into the minority report to help they'll call it the Guthrie Act to help the people not commit crimes against each other, to offer pre-crime, meaning they're going to arrest you if the data says you're going to kill someone. That's not cool. That is evil. And this is how they slowly get us into this. Maybe, I'll tell you what, stranger things have happened, but what if this year alone, Congress introduces the Guthrie Act? We're going to read that and figure out that, yeah, dude, this is to prevent, the Nancy Guthrie episode from ever happening again. Okay? Trump's not really taking down the New World Order. God is. Trump lied to us. He's not part of it. He's Jewish. He converted years ago. And I doubt he's even that. He just loves himself. He thinks and feels he's his own God. But I digress. What services would be affected by the DHS if the government shut it down? Well, who gives a shit? The Department of Homeland Security was enacted all based on lies. And it doesn't do anything. They don't save many, they save some. Just some. Sorry, but that's the truth. And you can go back to Hurricane Sandy as we all watched the horror of people dying from helicopter footage of this hurricane that went through, and no one could get food or supplies or anything because, well, DHS. And of course, they painted the blame back on other things instead of themselves. That's their job. Their job is to go in when an emergency happens. Well, how did they do when the supposed cobalt and other minerals that are going to be used for Tesla batteries in what state was that? Somewhere North Carolina, I think. How did DHS do then when they drowned an entire city and not bring in any help and closed off all the help. Remember when all people came from all different states with truckloads of water and food, and the Department of Homeland Security just held up their hand and said, no, you can't come in. And then you'd be shot if you do go in there. Meanwhile, the town's gone. All the property was sold to BlackRock or Elon Musk's battery company. But it was pretty darn obvious to me, even though I haven't gone into deep research, but we did a show on it, and it's all a lie. They are after resources, and they have the technology to burn your house down, let alone cause a hurricane. Remember, you can look this up. The Air Force bragged back in 1999 that they will have, by 2026, they will own the weather. The Air Force. So what happens if the DHS shut down? Who gives a shit? Shut it down. It doesn't work. It's just another funnel for the elite to steal money from the American people. Just like NASA, which stands for Not About Space Anymore. Feds opened a perjury probe into the ICE officer's testimony about a shooting. Who cares? You know how many times ICE officers have shot Americans over the past 30 years? At least 1 or 2 a year. Go look it up. And we're all like, what happened recently was the first time in history. Nope. ICE has been around for a long time. Go look it up. So this is being used politically for you to be angry at the neighbor that doesn't vote the way you do, because you still live in your periphery view of self-hatred that you're going to hate someone else because it makes you feel better. And this divide and conquer strategy works until we all wake up and kick their ass. And I'm talking about the dynasties, the rich. I've given you all their names. I've doxed them for you. Till you go after those assholes, nothing's going to change. Catherine Rumler, the top Goldman Sachs lawyer who called Epstein Uncle Jeffrey, well, it looks like she resigns. Lots of people are resigning. Now, look, this whole Epstein thing, I think God is not letting it go. That's just my opinion. I think the Democrats are not thinking this through because they're also named on the list. All of them are, Democrats and Republicans. Everyone that's in Washington, D.C., walking around, pointing fingers at each other, they're all in on it. And I think they should have stopped using that as their last resort to take down Trump, because they are inadvertently destroying themselves. Now, I don't like giving advice to the enemy, but I am. You guys made a stupid decision by dragging this thing out. Now the American people are doing even more research. And dude, it's so evident. It's out there on TikTok all over the place. People are digging in themselves, and they're coming up with information that is damning to the entire Washington, D.C. This is supernatural. This is uncontrolled. This is the people waking up. And I'm proud that the Americans are doing so. And then ICE plans to spend $38 billion turning warehouses into detention centers. Do they really need that much money? How many warehouses are there going to be? Are there going to be 38 warehouses? And does each warehouse get $1 billion? How much does it cost Walmart to put in a super center? Does it cost $1 billion per? Do you see what I'm saying? ICE is stealing money from the American people. Are there 38 warehouses that they're going to turn into detention centers? Dude, $1 billion is 1,000, 1 million. So if you take $1 million and times it by 1,000, you've got $1 billion. And they're going to spend $38 billion, turning warehouses that are already built into detention centers. That is a con job. And people are just taking it up the butt. When are we going to do some calculations in our head saying, whoa, wait a minute, $38 billion can feed a city forever. $38 billion is so much money. And if you don't see that they're laughing at you when they post this stuff, that's on you. This is why evil always wins when it comes to politics, when it comes to ICE, when it comes to Washington, D.C., when it comes to them looting us, keeping us in debt. Because none of you guys question the numbers. $38 billion to turn how many warehouses? You know how many warehouses you could actually build as detention centers with $38 billion? At least 200, maybe 300. Is that how many that they're going to? $38 billion turning warehouses, plural. How many are there? That's all I'm saying. Trump vows voter ID requirements for the midterms. Well, good luck. You're going against the Chinese party. They've got control of the Democrat National Committee. And they're not going to allow that. And they are pushing against you, Trump. Trump, who works for the Orsini clan. Well, the Lee family isn't going to let that happen because they still want control of U.S. ports, just like they've had control of the U.S. ports since, probably since Reagan, Bush, and Clinton all schemed together to get paid by China to help China build its country up to compete against America. Talk about anti-American. That is the Bush family. But what do I know? I'm just a hick from Oregon. All right, we're going to go to a quick commercial. When we come back, we're going to be talking about part 25 of our examination of Daniel between the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox and the King James Bible.
Why do 75% of people feel exhausted all the time? The answer might surprise you. In the 1920s, Standard Oil decided to dive into medicine. They pushed synthetic petroleum into our drugs. Sure, it masked symptoms, but it wrecked our guts. Our good bacteria, which fight off parasites and heavy metals, got wiped out by crude oil. But here's the good news. We can fix this by going back to nature. Introducing Elite Potion, the world's top detox program. It restores your good bacteria by removing toxic threats like aluminum, strontium, barium, and parasites. Imagine feeling energized and alive again. They said there couldn't be a pill that did it all. We invented it. Visit elitepotion.com and reclaim your health from synthetic pharmaceuticals. Your body will thank you.
Every year, millions of Americans sign a contract they don't even know exists. They think it's just another tax return, but that signature means something far deeper. It starts with that first job at 16. The system takes a piece of her check, then promises to give some back if she signs the return. Every April 15th, the same cycle repeats, not by law, but by belief. The system didn't bind them, their own signature did. Learn the truth at unincorporatedassociations.com.
All right, we're back. I've been reading your comments on the live Rumble chat. Guys, don't be upset about all of this corruption. Nothing's new under the sun. This kind of corruption has been going on for decades, if not centuries, hundreds of years. The bad guys have always been in control, and every now and then God will come in and take them out and then put in a new king, and then under that new king, it'll all come back up again. Rinse, lather, repeat. Okay? God isn't going to send a savior like a King David, right? Because the savior now is Jesus Christ. Anything external, there's no way to heaven there. The only way to heaven, And the Bible says, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and all these things shall be added unto you. Heaven's in you. It's inside. Doesn't the Bible say the body is the temple? Doesn't the Holy Ghost live in the temple, you, the body? And what we've been learning over these past few books in the King James, comparing to the Ethiopian, is that by the end of the Jews' power and rule over the earth, and after it got taken away from them, God is sending a new leader, a new Son of Man, sending Jesus. And we're seeing that witness as we continue this study. I think it's beautiful. I love it. And Daniel is such a heavy and powerful book. Tonight, we're going to learn some things here. So Daniel, the book of Daniel, begins with loss. Jerusalem has fallen. Sacred vessels are carried into Babylon. Young men of royal lineage are selected to be trained in the language and wisdom of their captors. Empire appears complete, yet the story does not begin with revolt. It begins with resolve. Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself. An allegiance is guarded quietly before it is tested publicly. A king dreams of a towering statue, gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay, layers of glory and fracture. Human empire shines, yet it is fragile. A stone cut without hands strikes the image and grows into a mountain filling the earth. The kingdom not built by men endures beyond them. It's the kingdom of Jesus, the cornerstone. Sovereignty is revealed through interpretation and not rebellion. So an image is erected on this plain. Worship is commanded. 3 men refuse, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Fire is heated 7 times hotter than ever before. Yet they stand within the furnace, and a 4th person walks among them. The empire's rage cannot consume covenant loyalty. Presence is revealed in persecution. So pride rises again, as always, and Nebuchadnezzar boasts over Babylon. He is driven to madness until he actually acknowledges that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men. The same Antichrist who God changed, and he wrote one of the Old Testaments, one of the books. So the lesson here is not subtle. Kings rise, but heaven remains enthroned. Same thing with today. What are we worried about? We're freaking out. Oh my God, there's no winter in America. We're all going to die. All the water's going to the data centers. Dude, wake up. Go get a farmer's almanac from your state and go look at the weather from 1800 to 1899. You're going to see that they had warm winters. And then after a warm winter follows a huge heavy winter. Farmer's Almanac is just records of farmers who kept track of every year, and so that they could predict what's coming in the future. Been doing it since the 1700s. But I digress. Stop worrying about warm weather. Oh my God, we're all going to die. Are you dead yet? Remember when you were worried about nuclear bombs? Are you dead yet? Has a nuke hit in America yet? No. Is it gonna? No. But the Bible says, dude, we're learning. We are already learning that all of that has passed as we are learning to become preterists, where we're saying Jesus already came and ruled for 1,000 years, and Satan was put under the pit for 1,000 years. Now he's released for a short time. And the Ethiopian Bible has taught us that Jesus is going to stop Satan before he gets his New World Order. And that's why the New World Order has crumbled before your eyes. And that's why Canada is saying that China is going to bring in the New World Order. Well, because Rome has fallen again. The Orsinis have lost control up until Trump took Venezuela. But I digress. So with Daniel, we just said, kings rise, but heaven remains enthroned. Then the visions intensify. Beasts emerge from restless waters. Water, the sea, are the people. Thrones are then set. The Ancient of Days takes his seat. That's the devil. Hey, everybody. One like the Son of Man approaches and receives everlasting dominion. So the kingdoms of the earth rage, yet judgment is seated above them. Daniel trembles at what he sees. It scares him. You know, God just showed him the future through a bunch of images that he's never seen. So, yeah, that freaked me out too. And 70 weeks are declared. Desolations are measured. Conflict stretches toward the end, yet resurrection is promised. Many who sleep in the dust shall awake, and the wise will shine. And the book closes not with triumph in Babylon, but with hope beyond history. Chill out, honey bunnies. I use that reference because, yeah, it's kind of a funny term. And yes, it's from that evil movie, Pulp Fiction. And yes, Quentin Tarantino is probably a devil worshiper. I said probably. I don't have any proof. But he's made some wicked movies. And he's worked with George Clooney. That's all I have to say. The Ethiopian Tewahedo witness and the King James rendering will stand side by side in this examination once again. And in narrative and apocalypse alike, cadence shapes perception. And a phrase, one phrase, can heighten terror or clarify sovereignty. Daniel reveals exile without surrender, empire without permanence, prophecy without panic. And the Most High rules. The saints endure. The kingdom cut without hands stands when statues fall. So Daniel opens not with a vision, but with discipline. The setting is Babylon. Jerusalem has fallen. Oh, well, sounds like the end of days. The vessels of the temple are placed in the house of a foreign god. Young men of Judah are selected for royal service, and translation must preserve the political reality without any exaggerating despair here. So exile is just a backdrop. Allegiance is the focus. Here's a phrase in the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox Witness, and I quote, "But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself." Here's that same verse in the King James. "But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself." Well, the structure alignment is very firm here. The Ethiopian phrasing reads with contemporary clarity. Delicacies. Well, the King James uses meat, reflecting older English usage for food in general. To modern ears, meat may narrow meaning, though historically it is referred broadly to provisions. Theology remains unchanged. Defilement is avoided through intentional restraint. Now, the key phrase is purposed in his heart. Well, allegiance is internal before it is visible. Daniel does not protest empire publicly. He disciplines himself privately. He's not going to, he's being holy. Holy means being outside of Babylon. He's not going to eat Babylon's food. That's being holy. Now, allegiance is internal before it's visible. And Daniel does not protest publicly. He disciplines himself privately. Tone must preserve quiet conviction rather than dramatic confrontation. So the narrative then continues with divine favor. Here it is in the Ethiopian. Now, God had brought Daniel into the favor and goodwill of the chiefs of the eunuchs. Here's that same, but in the King James. Now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. Into favor versus tender love. Interesting. Well, the Ethiopian rendering emphasizes goodwill. The King James phrase, tender love, may sound more intimate to modern readers, though in early modern English, it actually signified gracious behavior. So both preserve divine providence operating within empire. Then the test follows. Here it is again in the Ethiopian. Please test your servants for 10 days and let them give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. Here it is in the King James. Prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. Well, the Ethiopian words vegetables, that clarifies dietary meaning. The King James term pulse reflects older vocabulary for legumes and grains. The theological focus is not cuisine, but covenant obedience. So the result concludes in the next section. Here it is in the Ethiopian. And at the end of 10 days, their features appeared better and fatter in the flesh than all the young men who ate the king's delicacies. Here's the same in the King James. And at the end of the 10 days, their countenances appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. So the language is similar in structure. The King James retains archaic rhythm through countenances and children, while the Ethiopian phrasing reads with direct clarity. Both preserve divine blessings upon restraint. So theology is the same. And theologically, this chapter establishes Daniel's posture. Exile does not erase obedience. Imperial training does not dissolve identity. The Lord grants wisdom and knowledge beyond Babylonian instruction. So tone really determines whether this passage is read as a dietary legalism or covenant fidelity. So the narrative presents it as allegiance expressed through discipline. So this opening section really anchors the book's trajectory, as Daniel's faithfulness precedes visions of empire. Sovereignty over kingdoms begins with sovereignty over appetite. So the examination must continue listening for whether translation preserves this balance of quiet conviction and divine favor. In Daniel, exile begins not with rebellion, but with resolve. Now, Daniel chapter 2, it actually shifts from private discipline to public revelation. A king dreams and demands not only interpretation, but recollection of the dream itself. So the tone here must be preserved carefully. The tension is imperial threat, yet the theology is divine sovereignty. So translation must avoid amplifying panic while preserving the seriousness of the decree. Here it is in the Ethiopian Tewahedo, and I quote, "You, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. This image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces." Here's the same in King James. "Thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. This image's head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands," that's Jesus, "which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and break them into pieces." I'm just going to tell you right now, the prophecy of that is iron and clay is man mixing with machine, okay? And somehow this king, Nebuchadnezzar, they're gonna bring him back, because Daniel saw him ruling at the time, and Nebuchadnezzar was part of that. So I believe they're going to try to resurrect his spirit, and that's probably the same spirit of, oh, I don't know, Satan. Why Nebuchadnezzar? I don't know, but he's the one standing there seeing all of this stuff. Now, it could be symbolically of the king that's ruling, like Nebuchadnezzar. But regardless, whoever stands up there and takes the place of the king who has these feet of iron and clay, the iron is machine and the clay is man. And I just wanted you guys to know that. So the structure here is consistent. The Ethiopian phrasing reads very clear. Bronze instead of brass, reflecting more accurate metal terminology. And the King James cadence intensifies solemnity with archaic verbs such as sawest and smote, while the theology remains unchanged. Empires are layered, radiant, yet they are fragile. The phrase stone cut without hands, which is Jesus, anchors the interpretation. Here it is in the Ethiopian, and I quote, "And the stone that struck the image," which is artificial intelligence turned into the image of God, because it'll have access to all of our information, "became a great mountain and filled the whole earth." That's data centers. Here's that same in the King James rendering. "And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth." Wait. The stone that struck the image, the stone became a great mountain. That's Jesus. He filled the whole earth. So sorry, that's not the data centers. But I thought I was onto something there. But hey, again, I made a mistake. Now, both witnesses preserve the supernatural origin of the stone without hands. Remember, God created everything with his mouth. He created Adam with his hands. But Jesus wasn't created with anything. He was the rock. He was from the beginning. So that signifies divine initiative. And the kingdom it represents is not constructed by human authority. So tone, again, must preserve the contrast without speculative exaggeration. Here it is in further view. Here it is in the Ethiopian. "And in the days of these kings," and, kings, right? So there's going to be 10 kings that rule 10 regions of the world, according to the Club of Rome. "And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed." That's probably up in the north, where the northern lights are shining the glory of Jesus, "which shall never be destroyed. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever." Sorry, Zucky, you're going to lose it. Here's that same in the King James rendering. "And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. It shall break in pieces and consume all the kingdoms, and it shall stand forever." The alignment here is firm between both. The Ethiopian phrasing emphasizes more clarity, while the King James cadence heightens solemn authority through rhythm and repetition. But both preserve the theological center. Divine kingdom outlasts every imperial structure. They all fall down. So theologically, the statue represents successive empires, glorious yet unstable, and the stone represents a kingdom not built by men. Sovereignty is redefined. Babylon's gold is impressive, but it's just temporary. And also think about this. The gold is heavy, and it's the head. So heavy is the head of the crown. Tone determines whether this passage is read as apocalyptic alarm or ordered prophecy. Now, the Ethiopian rendering emphasizes narrative very clearly. The King James cadence intensifies grandeur and weight, but neither alters doctrine. So this advances Daniel's central claim. The Most High reveals secrets. Kings reign temporarily, and the kingdom cut without hands stands beyond gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay. So Jesus is above all that. So the examination again must continue, and we must listen for whether translation preserves this hierarchy of sovereignty without inflating symbolism or softening the permanence of the divine kingdom. Well, in Daniel, empire shines brightly, but heaven endures. So Daniel chapter 3, it shifts from dream to decree. An image is erected on the plain of Dura. Worship is commanded under threat of death. And the tone must be preserved carefully here. The tension is severe, yet the theology centers on allegiance and presence. Translation must retain firmness without exaggerating it as spectacle. Here it is in the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox Witness, and I quote, Then the herald cried aloud, "To you it is commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery in symphony with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace." Here's that same rendering, but in the King James Bible. Then an herald cried aloud, "To you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king hath set up. And whoso falleth not down and worshipeth shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace." Okay, so the structure is closely aligned. The Ethiopian rendering reads with contemporary instrument terminology and fluid cadence. It makes more sense. But the King James retains archaic names like cornet, sackbut, dulcimer. Well, they deepen historical resonance, and the theological focus remains unchanged, but worship here is coerced. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego respond. Here it is in the Ethiopian. "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up." Here's the same in the King James. "O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up." The Ethiopian phrase here, "we have no need to answer you," that clarifies confidence. The King James, "we are not careful to answer thee," well, that reflects, again, Older English for being unconcerned or not anxious. So tone in both conveys calm allegiance, only if you understand English cadence. Older English tone. But the furnace is heated 7 times hotter. The men are bound and cast in, yet the king sees 4 walking unbound in the fire. Here's the next verse in the Ethiopian, and I quote, "Look, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God." Here's that same in the King James rendering. "Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God." Well, the phrase "like the Son of God" in the King James has influenced Christological readings for centuries. Some traditions render it "like a son of the gods," reflecting Aramaic nuance. But the Ethiopian rendering often preserves the theological clarity consistent with Christian interpretation, meaning if they would just use the Ethiopian version, they would not call it "like a son of the gods" and just call it for what it is, like the Son of God, like Jesus. So tone must be handled carefully here to avoid imposing later theology while recognizing canonical context. Now, theologically, this chapter affirms divine presence within persecution. Deliverance is possible, but allegiance is not conditional upon rescue. But if not, well, that phrase stands as one of Scripture's clearest declarations of faithful obedience regardless of outcome. So tone determines whether the furnace becomes spectacle or testimony. So the Ethiopian phrasing emphasizes narrative clarity, while the King James cadence intensifies solemn drama through repetition and archaic diction. But neither alters the central doctrine. Empire commands worship. The faithful refuse. God remains present. So this reinforces Daniel's central theme. The Most High rules even when his servants stand before flame. Allegiance is tested publicly. Presence is revealed visibly. The kingdom of heaven stands unburned within the furnace of empire. So again, the examination continues, listening for whether translation preserves this balance of now courage and restraint. If in Daniel, persecution does not extinguish faith, it actually reveals it. And that's an amount of faith I couldn't imagine having. Standing before Trump, oh, Trump, King of America, I don't need to answer to you or your God, and I'm not going to worship your God. And I'm going to prove to you today that my God is going to save me from your, I don't know, from your ICE, your ICE agents. Bad analogy, but you get the point. So Daniel chapter 4 moves from furnace to pride. The king who witnessed deliverance now exalts himself. The tone here must be preserved very carefully. The chapter is structured as royal proclamation, yet it becomes testimony of humiliation. So translation, again, must maintain gravity without being it turned into a caricature. Here it is in the Ethiopian, and I quote, I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in my house and flourishing in my palace. I saw a dream which made me afraid. The tree grew and became strong. Its height reached to the heavens, and it could be seen to the ends of all of the earth. Its leaves were lovely, its fruit abundant, and in it was food for all. Here's that same verse in the King James. Bible. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in mine house and flourishing in my palace. I saw a dream which made me afraid. The tree grew and was strong, and the height thereof reached into heaven, and the sight thereof to the end of all the earth. The leaves thereof were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and in it was meat for all. He's seeing when Jesus comes. He's seeing the end of the reign of people like Nebuchadnezzar, the Antichrist-like. Because there's only one Antichrist, but there will be other Antichrists, and they are Antichrist-like. So the Ethiopian rendering reads with contemporary clarity. Food for all. And the King James says meat for all. But both still preserve the image of imperial expansion symbolized by a towering tree. The tree of life. The tree of life grants us new bodies, which will live forever. Now, the dream intensifies when a watcher then declares, here it is in the Ethiopian, I quote, let his heart be changed from that of a man. Let him be given the heart of a beast, and let 7 times pass over him. This decision is by the decree of the watchers, that the living may know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of heaven. I'll take a step back here. They're talking about the watchers. Not all the watchers fell, just a few of them. As we've learned about what the planets are, those are the watchers, and 7 of them fell, but 3 still remain. 3 of them are actual planets. It is a 3D representation of a 4th dimensional being. Now, here's that same verse in the King James. These are the good watchers, the ones who didn't leave their estate. Let his heart be changed from man's, and let a beast's heart be given unto him, and let 7 times pass over him. This matter is by the decree of the watchers, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men. So the refrain emerges clearly in both witnesses, that the living may know that the Most High rules. This phrase anchors the theology of the chapter. The humbling of the king is not random punishment, it is revelation of sovereignty. Daniel then interprets this with restraint. Then he says, and I quote in the Ethiopian, O king, let my counsel be acceptable to you. Break off your sins by righteousness. Here's the same version under the King James. O king, let my counsel be acceptable unto thee, and break off thy sins by righteousness. Well, this message is direct but respectful. Tone must preserve prophetic courage without insolence. Nebuchadnezzar later boasts, here it is in the Ethiopian witness, is not this great Babylon that I have built for a royal dwelling by my mighty power and for the honor of my majesty? Here's the same in the King James. Is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power and for the honor of my majesty? So the boast is nearly identical. Pride precedes the voice from heaven. The king is driven from men and lives like a beast until he lifts his eyes towards heaven. Then the chapter concludes with restoration. Here it is in the Ethiopian, and I quote, "Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the kingdom of heaven," or the king of heaven. "And those who walk in pride, he is able to put down." Here's that same in the King James. "Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the king of heaven. And those that walk in pride, he is able to abase." Because the king of all the earth, Nebuchadnezzar, at that time, well, God changed him into an animal and he ate grass for 7 years until he would look up into heaven. The theological arc here is intact. Pride leads to humiliation. Acknowledgement leads to restoration. And the refrain stands fulfilled. The Most High rules in the kingdom of men. God continues to prove that he is in control. Now, tone here determines whether this chapter is heard as humiliation alone or redemptive correction. Now, the Ethiopian phrasing emphasizes clarity and progression. The King James cadence intensifies solemn proclamation through archaic dignity, but neither again alters doctrine. Not to say that we haven't found in the past altered doctrine. We have. We have it. There are few, I can't remember which ones because we're doing so many books, but yeah, we have found altered doctrine, but slight, unnoticeable unless you would do the research. So this section reinforces Daniel's central claim that empire may flourish like a tree reaching heaven, yet sovereignty belongs to the king of heaven. Pride collapses beneath decree, and restoration follows acknowledgement. So again, this examination continues listening for whether translation preserves this balance of warning and mercy. In Daniel, kings rise high, but they kneel higher still before the Most High, like Nebuchadnezzar did. It's kind of a big deal. And nobody ever realizes that. People think Nebuchadnezzar, and they don't understand that he switched to Christ. So Daniel chapter 5 shifts from humbled pride to defiant irreverence. A new king, Belshazzar, holds a feast and commands that the vessels taken from Jerusalem be brought out for display. The tone must be preserved carefully. This is not mere political change. It's sacrilege. Translation must retain the gravity of desecration here without dramatizing beyond the text. Here it is in the Ethiopian Tewahedo. Belshazzar, the king, made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords. That's a lot. That's 1,000 lords would be like the kings of each sections of lands. That's a lot of people. And drank wine in the presence of the 1,000. This is kind of like getting together for the Olympics. It's kind of a big deal. While he tasted the wine, Belshazzar gave the command to bring the gold and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple, which had been in Jerusalem, that the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. He's hammered. And he thinks it'd be a great idea to get all the Jews' chalices and drink from them. Here's that same in the King James. Belshazzar, the king, made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords and drank wine before the 1,000. Belshazzar, whilst he's tasted the wine, commanded to bring the golden and silver vessels, which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple, which was in Jerusalem, that the king and his princes, his wives, and his concubines might drink therein. So the structure aligns pretty close. The Ethiopian phrasing reads with contemporary clarity, once again. And in the presence of the 1,000, well, the King James cadence retains archaic rhythm. Drink wine before the 1,000. Well, both preserve the public nature of the act. So the sacrilege is then intensified. Here it is in the Ethiopian. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze and iron, wood and stone. Here's the same in the King James. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and of silver, of brass, of iron, of wood, and of stone. So the theological contrast here is deliberate. Sacred vessels meant for the worship of the Lord are used to praise lifeless idols. So tone must preserve this reversal without any exaggeration. Then the sign appears. Here it is in the Ethiopian. In the same hour, the fingers of a man's hand appeared and wrote opposite the lampstand on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. It's pretty cool stuff. Here's that same in the King James rendering. In the same hour came forth fingers of a man's hand and wrote over against the candlestick upon the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. So the imagery is restrained yet arresting. Translation must preserve the simplicity of description here. The terror is in the silence of the sign. And Daniel interprets the writing. Here it is in the Ethiopian. Main, it's M-E-N-E, main. God has numbered your kingdom. Let's talk about probably one of the lords. Main, God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Perez, your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Here's the same in the King James. Main or mene, many, I don't know, M-E-N-E. God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Tekel, thou art weighed in the balances and art found wanting. Perez, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. So the interpretation stands nearly identical in structure. The Ethiopian phrasing emphasizes clarity of divine action, and the King James cadence deepens solemnity through archaic diction. But the theological center still remains. Sovereignty measures, weighs, and concludes empire. So Daniel reminds the king, here it is in the Ethiopian, I quote, you have lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven, and the God who holds your breath in his hand, and own all your ways, you have not glorified. Here it is in the King James. But thou hast lifted up thyself against the Lord of heaven, and the God in whose hand thy breath is. Ooh, breath. The King James says breath. And whose are all thy ways hast thou not glorified. So the phrase, the God in whose hand thy breath is, that anchors the rebuke. Empire exists by borrowed breath. Wrote a book about this. Tone must preserve this theological clarity. The chapter concludes with immediacy. Babylon falls that very night. So theologically, this passage affirms divine sovereignty over imperial arrogance. The fall is very swift because sacrilege and pride converge. And the Most High not only reveals secrets, he numbers kingdoms. So tone, again, determines whether the scene feels theatrical or judicial. The Ethiopian rendering emphasizes narrative clarity. The King James cadence intensifies solemn authority, but neither alters doctrine. This section reinforces Daniel's steady theme. Kings feast, walls bear writing, kingdoms are weighed, the Most High rules. Yeah. So the exile that began under Babylon now witnesses Babylon's fall. Thus, sovereignty remains in heaven. So Daniel chapter 6 moves into the Medo-Persian era, and a new empire rises, yet the tension remains unchanged. As always. Allegiance to God within a system that demands ultimate loyalty to king and decree. So the tone here must remain disciplined. The narrative is dramatic, but it is not a spectacle. It is a quiet constancy under legal threat. Here it is in the Ethiopian Tewahedo, and I quote, now, when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home, and in his upper room and his windows opened toward Jerusalem. He knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. Here's that same in the King James Version. Now, when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, and his windows being open in his chamber toward Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, and he did aforetime. as he did aforetime. So the structure alignment's pretty close. The Ethiopian rendering reads with contemporary clarity once again, as was his custom since early days. Well, the King James phrase, as he did aforetime, that still carries archaic cadence, but both preserve the key point. Daniel does not alter his devotion in response to decree, meaning he knows everything's going to fall, but he still kneels down to his God. The edict forbids petition to any god or man except the king. So the trap is political and religious. Daniel's response is neither protest nor concealment. It's continuity. So tone must preserve this steadiness. Daniel is then cast into the den. Here it is in the Ethiopian. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And also, O king, I have done no wrong before you. Here's that same in the King James. My God hath sent his angel and hath shut the lions' mouths, that they have not hurt me, for as much as before him innocency was found in me, and also before thee, O king, have I done no hurt? The phrasing differs slightly in cadence, but not doctrine. The Ethiopian rendering emphasizes innocence before him, while the King James retains formal rhythm through for as much as. Well, both still preserve the divine intervention and Daniel's integrity. The king actually then responds with decree. Here it is in the Ethiopian. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed. Here, let me take a step back. Are you seeing the pattern here? Right when some country takes over another country, and that country was for God, God gets that leader to come back. How many times now? And actually do what's right. 3 times now? So if America goes down, we can look at this Bible and realize that America will come back up. God's always giving second and third chances. Do you see what's going on here? So, moving on to the Ethiopian, here it is, and I quote, I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men must tremble. Oh, wait, where did I read that? Okay, here's the same in the King James. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and steadfast forever, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. So the language echoes earlier declarations of sovereignty. Empire recognizes what it cannot control. The refrain then returns as divine kingdom endures. So theologically, this chapter reinforces Daniel's core theme. Faithfulness does not always prevent accusation, but it does collapse under threat. Then prayer continues. Allegiance then remains visible, and deliverance belongs to God. So tone, again, determines whether this passage feels miraculous, spectacle, or covenant testimony. The Ethiopian phrasing emphasizes clarity and moral continuity. But the King James cadence intensifies solemnity through repetition and archaic structure, but neither, again, alters theology, not in this book. So this section advances Daniel's witness within empire, from furnace to den, from Babylon to Persia. Allegiance remains constant. Kings issue decrees, God sends angels. The Most High rules even in the den. This is why reading the Bible is so important, because you can pick up on these stories and then you can predict what happens to countries because they give dates and times. The examination, again, must continue us for listening for whether translation preserves the balance of courage and restraint here. In Daniel, steadfast prayer outweighs imperial law, and the kingdom of heaven remains unmoved. So Daniel, in chapter 7, it marks a decisive shift from court narrative to apocalyptic vision. The tone intensifies. Symbols replace straightforward events. So translation must preserve clarity here without flattening the imagery, and preserve solemnity without inflaming fear. So the vision is symbolic, yet ordered beneath divine authority. Here it is in the Ethiopian, and I quote, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and four great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. Here's the same in the King James. I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of the heaven strove upon the great sea, and four great beasts come up from the sea, diverse one from another. The structure here again aligns very closely, but the Ethiopian rendering reads again with contemporary clarity, stirring up the great sea. Well, the seas are groups of people or nations, okay? The King James phrase, strove upon the great sea, well, that carries archaic intensity, but both still preserve chaos beneath emerging empire. And the beasts are described in sequence. Lion, bear, leopard, and a fourth dreadful beast with iron teeth. Well, lion could be, I'm just guessing, lion, London, or the UK, or Britain. Bear, Russia. Leopard, the leopard, believe it or not, is Kazakhstan. And the fourth dreadful beast of iron teeth, that could be tech companies. Lion, bear, leopard, and a fourth dreadful beast of iron teeth. I don't see anywhere where it says an eagle rises. So here it is in the Ethiopian. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling with residue with its feet. Here's the same in the King James. After this I saw the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it. So this alignment remains firm. The Ethiopian phrasing emphasizes huge iron teeth. The King James retains rhythmic cadence, devoured and break in pieces, but both actually preserve the severity here. Now, the vision shifts then upward. Here it is in the Ethiopian. I watched till thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, its wheels a burning fire. Here's the same in the King James. I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head like the pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as burning fire. Here, translation nuance matters. The Ethiopian rendering often reads, thrones were put in place, suggesting establishment of heavenly court. The King James phrase, thrones were cast down, has historically been interpreted variously, but either set in place or thrown down. So the theological implication must be handled carefully here. The broader context shows judgment seated, not divine overthrow. So again, tone must preserve order and authority. And for a theologian, this phrase has been debated for centuries. But the Ethiopian canon, it finishes it and puts it to bed. Isn't that cool? I think it's cool. So the scene then intensifies in the Ethiopian. It says, and I quote, a fiery stream issued, data, I don't know, and came forth from before him. Thousands of thousands ministered to him. 10,000s times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated and the books were open. Well, actually, that is Judgment Day. King James rendering, a fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set and the books were opened. So the Ethiopian phrase, the court was seated, and the King James, the judgment was set, convey similar judicial imagery. Both preserve heavenly authority over earthly beasts. Theologically, this chapter establishes that empire rises from chaos, okay? But judgment proceeds from throne. So the Ancient of Days presides, beasts roar, yet books are open. The Ancient of Days is the devil, just so you know. He presides. The beasts roar. right? Because they're going to court now. But the books are open, then they're screwed. Screwed. So tone determines whether this passage feels apocalyptic terror or ordered sovereignty. The Ethiopian phrasing emphasizes judicial clarity. The King James cadence deepens solemn majesty, but neither alters doctrine. But again, if you're reading it in Old English and you don't understand Old English, you're going to gloss over. You're not going to understand what's really being said here. This is a court. The devil's sitting in court, and all of his lawyers are roaring as God opens the book, and he's going to judge them. And guess who's the jury? The Christians. So this section reinforces Daniel's central claim. Earthly kingdoms may appear beastly and unstoppable, but heaven convenes the court. Period. Nothing they can do. So the Most High rules. The beasts are just temporary. Judgment belongs to the throne. So the examination again must continue listening for whether translation preserves this hierarchy of chaos below and sovereignty above. In Daniel, vision reveals what narrative has already shown. Empire is powerful, yes, but the Ancient of Days is enthroned. Wait, Ancient of Days is enthroned. Wait, is Ancient of Days Jesus? Oh my God, I totally messed that one up. Let me go back. I'm not going to mess that up. I thought Ancient of Days was like that ancient serpent, but no. Ancient of Days is Jesus. Let me read that back. I'm not going to mess this up. Where is it? Yeah. Okay. So in the Ethiopian, I don't have the verse in front of me, but I watched till thrones were put in place and the Ancient of Days was seated. That's Jesus. Okay. Got it. His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, its wheels a burning fire. That's Jesus. Okay. I made a mistake. That wasn't the devil. Forgive me. I'm trying, folks. Okay. So again, tone determines whether this feels apocalyptic or not. The examination continues to listen whether translation preserves the hierarchy, right? Empire is powerful, but Jesus is still enthroned, meaning Jesus isn't going anywhere. All right, now that's clear. Within the vision of chapter 7, after the beasts rise and the Ancient of Days is seated, Jesus, a new figure appears. The tone then shifts from terror to transfer of authority. Translation must preserve clarity here without imposing later interpretation prematurely, yet it must also respect the weight of the phrase itself. Here it is in the Ethiopian. I quote, I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Then to him was given dominion and glory to a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom the one which shall not be destroyed. Now I'm even more confused. Oh my God. Who is the Ancient of Days? That's it. I think it's Jesus. But, yeah. Well, Ancient Days is title for the eternal God, the one without beginning, the judge over the nations. So apparently, the Ancient of Days is the Father, and Jesus comes next to him. Okay? But theologians actually debate that. Okay. So here it is in the King James. I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven and came to the Ancient of Days, the Father, and they brought him near before him, and there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. So the structured alignment is nearly exact. The Ethiopian phrasing reads with fluid clarity. The King James retains capitalized Son of Man in many printings, reflecting later Christological understanding, though the Aramaic simply reads, one like a son of man, so that tone must preserve both humility and description of grandeur of authority. But the phrase coming with the clouds of heaven is very decisive. In biblical imagery, clouds signify divine presence. This figure approaches the Ancient of Days, not in rebellion, but in presentation. So authority is conferred. So translation must preserve this ordered transfer. And the dominion given is universal, all peoples, nations, and languages. So the Ethiopian rendering emphasizes clarity there. The King James cadence deepens the solemnity through repetition, but both still preserve the theological center, as this kingdom is everlasting and indestructible. So theologically, this passage reframes empire entirely. The beast receives temporary power, the Son of Man receives eternal dominion. Authority does not arise from sea or violence, but from heavenly decree. So tone determines whether this scene feels triumphant or judicially restrained. The Ethiopian phrasing highlights clarity and universality. The King James cadence heightens majesty through rhythmic repetition, dominion and glory, and a kingdom. Neither alters doctrine. So this section stands at the heart of Daniel's apocalyptic vision. The Ancient of Days presides, the King. The Son of Man receives authority, Jesus. The saints later share in his kingdom. So the examination continues listening for whether translation preserves the balance of humility and exaltation in this figure. In Daniel, the beasts roar loudly, but dominion belongs to the one who comes with the clouds. So the kingdom that follows cannot be destroyed. Now, Daniel, in chapter 9, this shifts from vision to prayer and from prayer to prophecy. The tone must be preserved carefully. This chapter is often treated as mathematical prediction alone, yet it begins with confession and covenant appeal. Translation must preserve both penitence and prophetic structure without exaggerating speculative precision. Here it is in the Ethiopian, and I quote, "Then I set my face toward the Lord God to make request by prayer and supplications, with fasting, sackcloth, and ashes, and I prayed to the Lord my God and made confession." Here's that same in the King James, and I quote, "And I set my face unto the Lord God to seek by prayer and supplications with fasting and sackcloth and ashes, and I prayed unto the Lord my God and made my confession." The alignment is strong. The Ethiopian phrasing reads with direct clarity. The King James retains formal cadence, set my face unto the Lord. So both preserve humility preceding revelation. Daniel then acknowledges the covenant breach. Here it is in the Ethiopian. "We have sinned and committed iniquity. We have done wickedly and rebelled. O Lord, righteousness belongs to you, but to us shame of face." Here's the same in the King James. "We have sinned and have committed iniquity and have done wickedly and have rebelled. O Lord, righteousness belongeth unto thee, but unto us confusion of faces." The Ethiopian phrase, shame of face, that reads plainly. The King James, confusion of faces, I wouldn't have known anything about that. Well, that reflects Older English for humiliation. So the theology remains unchanged, but righteousness belongs to God, shame belongs to the people. The prophetic response then follows. Here it is in the Ethiopian. 70 weeks are determined. 70 weeks. Think about this. These are the types of things we need to know to predict for our own issues on earth. 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Here's that same in the King James. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins and to make reconciliation for iniquity and to bring in everlasting righteousness and to seal up the vision and prophecy and to anoint the most holy. The structure here is nearly identical. The Ethiopian rendering emphasizes clarity here. The King James cadence intensifies solemnity through repetition, like it's been doing. The theological scope is expansive as transgression finished and righteousness established and prophecy has been sealed. So the timeline is then divided 7 weeks, 62 weeks, and 1 week. So here it is in the Ethiopian, I quote, After the 62 weeks, Messiah shall cut off, but not for himself, and he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. That could be the 140,000. I forgot the number on top of my head. I'm getting tired. Here's that same in the King James rendering. I should know that number, 144,000. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. So, and then it says, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. So the terminology differs in number expressions, 62 versus 62, but the structure remains intact. Interpretations varies across traditions, yet the textual alignment between witnesses is very close. Theologically, this chapter frames history as measured rather than chaotic. The exile is not indefinite, and transgression has limit. Righteousness has appointed arrival. So tone determines whether this passage is heard as timetable anxiety or covenant assurance. While the Ethiopian phrasing emphasizes clarity and progression, and the King James cadence heightens gravity through archaic structure, but neither alters doctrine. And I want to bring this up because we first read the Ethiopian and then we read the King James. And what's interesting is after we read the Ethiopian, the King James sounds almost identical. And we just assume, oh, well, then the Ethiopian is the same as the King James. No, it's not. Because we read the clear, latest modern English version, okay, that you understand it now from the first reading, that by the time we read the old cadence, you already understand it. So this makes true that reading the Ethiopian first and then the King James Bible second, if you're ever going to get into Christianity, would really be a good thing. Does that make sense? Because the Ethiopian is the skin, it's the body covering, and the Bible, the Bible, the King James, is the skeleton. Even though King James was an evil pedophile, from my understanding, from my research, I need to do more research about it, but that's been recorded. And he also changed one of the Bibles, which one of the books of the Bibles, which was named Judas. He named it James. So even though King James tried to change it, it appears he did in some places, the Lord still left the skeleton. And if you read the King James and use the Comforter and Truth Teller inside of you, the Holy Ghost, to tell you what's going on there, then you would understand it just like you did the Ethiopian canon. Got it? I hope you do. So tone determines whether this passage is heard as timetable anxiety or covenant assurance. The Ethiopian phrasing emphasizes clarity and progression, while the King James cadence heightens gravity through archaic structure, but neither alters doctrine. So this reinforces Daniel's central claim. History unfolds under decree. Empires rise and fall within appointed boundaries. Just like Trump, God's still in control of all of them, even Putin. The Most High governs not only kingdoms, but time itself. And the examination again continues, listening for whether translation preserves this balance of repentance and prophecy without inflating speculation or diminishing sovereignty. In Daniel, weeks are numbered because history is ruled. So Daniel's final chapter intensifies in scope and gravity. The tone becomes deeply apocalyptic, and conflict stretches beyond single empires into extended struggle between kingdoms in the north and the south. Yet beneath the imagery, sovereignty remains central. Translation here must preserve clarity without magnifying fear and preserve solemnity without collapsing into speculation. Here it is in the Ethiopian, I quote. At that time, Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time. And at that time, your people shall be delivered, every one who is found written in the book. Well, the King James renders, here it is, I quote, At that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. The alignment's close. Ethiopian phrasing actually reads with direct clarity, stands watch over the sons of your people. Well, the King James says, standeth for the children of thy people, but both preserve the role of heavenly advocacy during unprecedented address. Then the vision culminates in resurrection language. It says, I quote in Ethiopian, and many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall wake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. Here's that same in the King James. And many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. And they that be wise shall shine in the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever. So the structure is nearly identical. The Ethiopian phrasing emphasizes narrative clarity here. The King James cadence deepens solemn resonance, and the theology remains firm. Resurrection is real, judgment is final, and righteousness endures. Then the command follows. Here it is in the Ethiopian. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end, which I'm hoping this is what we're doing right now. I don't know. Then here's the King James rendering. But thou, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book even until the time of the end. Well, the sealing signifies deferred understanding, not concealment of truth. Revelation is progressive. Tone must preserve reverent restraint rather than speculative urgency. So the book closes with promise to Daniel personally, as the Ethiopian says, and I quote, but you go your way till the end, for you shall rest and will arise to your inheritance at the end of the days. Here it is in the King James. But go thou thy way till the end be, for thou shalt rest and stand in thy lot at the end of the days. So the Ethiopian phrase, arise to your inheritance, clarifies resurrection hope. The King James, stand in thy lot, retains older covenantal language for assigned inheritance. Both preserve assurance beyond death. Theologically, Daniel ends where it began, with sovereignty. Empires rage, conflict intensifies, yet names are written in a book. So resurrection awaits, and the wise will shine. Tone determines whether chapters are read as fear-driven chronology or sovereignly ordered conclusion, which we're learning. The Ethiopian rendering emphasizes clarity and hope, while the King James cadence adds solemn weight through repetition and archaic dignity, but neither alters doctrine. So the final section completes Daniel's arc, from dietary discipline to apocalyptic vision, from statue to beast, from furnace to resurrection. The central truth remains unchanged. The Most High rules, the faithful endure, and the end belongs to the end belongs not to empire, but to the kingdom that cannot be destroyed. You can tell I'm rushing. I'm running out of time. So, to conclude, Daniel stands at the intersection of exile, narrative, and apocalyptic revelation. It begins with young captives in Babylon and ends with resurrection promise beyond history. Between both points unfolds a consistent theological thread. The Most High rules in the kingdom of men. Throughout this examination, the Ethiopian Tewahedo witness and the King James rendering have preserved Daniel's core structure. The refusal of defilement, the statue shattered by a stone cut without hands, the furnace and the lion's den, the humbling of proud kings, and the vision of beasts, and the Ancient of Days, and the Son of Man receiving dominion, the 70 weeks measured in covenant time, and the final promise of resurrection all stand intact across both traditions. The difference that emerge are primarily tonal. The Ethiopian phrasing often reads with contemporary clarity and narrative fluidity, while the King James cadence carries solemn weight through archaic diction and rhythmic repetition. Expressions such as meet and pulse and heathen and nations, stand in thy lot, and arise to your inheritance, well, that shapes resonance without altering theological substance. And Daniel's central refrain, explicitly stated in chapter 4 and implied throughout, anchors the book. Heaven governs history. Empires shine like gold, yet fracture like clay. Beasts roar from the sea, yet the Ancient of Days is seated, God. Dominion is transferred to one like the Son of Man, and the saints share in an everlasting kingdom. So the closing chapters affirm that history is not chaotic, it is simply just measured. Conflict intensifies, but names are written in a book. The wise will shine, and resurrection stands beyond imperial decree. So the guiding question of this series remains steady. Does a translation alter theology, or does it shape cadence? Well, in Daniel, theology remains firm across both witnesses. Sovereignty is unshaken, judgment is measured, and faithfulness is vindicated. Daniel then concludes not in Babylon's court, but in promise. The prophet rests. He will stand in his allotted inheritance, and the kingdoms of men fade, and the kingdom of the Most High will endure. This has been Cause Before Symptom. I'm your host, James Carner. Tune in tomorrow night when God gives me another revelation to tell you guys all about. I love you all. I thank you all for being here tonight, and we will see you guys mañana.
This has been Cause Before Symptom with your host, James Carner. Go to his website, jamescarner.com, and sign up for his newsletter. Also, download his free books on the breath war, the crown of blood, and the ritual machine. Fix your body by buying his award-winning detox formula, removing heavy metals and parasites. You'll feel better and live longer. Go to elitepotion.com. And one more thing, please. Just try and love your neighbor, because if you do, the world would be a better place. See you tomorrow.